introduction. Dear bishops, dear priests, sisters, dear scholars and friends of SEERI, I have the pleasure to give a keynote here on the subject Assyrians and Chaldeans in Iraq. In my paper, I will confine myself to a focus on the Assyrians and Chaldeans in the young Iraqi state. There's a close correlation between the flight and expulsion of the Syrians on the one hand and the massacre of them on the other hand. Those events should be seen in the context of the political development and the church structures. Also, the integration of the Chaldeans in the young Iraqi state has to be considered in its political and ecclesiastical context. I will start this paper with an outline of the history of the Assyrians and Chaldeans in Iraq, but for the sake of time I will shorten it. Afterwards, I will provide a short analysis. Who are the Assyrians? And who are the Chaldeans? It is not easy to give a simple answer to these questions. For one thing, the concept of ethnic identity in itself is ambiguous. Apart from that, the concept is subject to constant changes in the course of history, and it is instrumentalized for political ends. Later on, this paper will address the question to which extent the terms Assyrians and Chaldeans have to be used in the political sphere, have been used in the political sphere for the purpose of differentiation and as a means of a political debate. Nowadays, there seems to be a consensus that Assyrians as well as Chaldeans count among the Syrian-speaking Christians, Syriac-speaking Christians. However, this has not always been the case during the past 100 years. After the end of World War I, a delegation of the different Assyrian religious communities attended the peace conference in Paris that took place in 1990. According to the definition of this delegation, the Assyrians comprise the following groups: Nestorians, Chaldeans, Jacobites, a Maronite element, Persian Assyrians, Assyrians in Russia, a Muslim Assyrian group, as well as the Syriac and the Yazidis. The Syriac are a Kurdish tribe of the Sunni faith. The Yazidis from a separate religious community of non-Muslim faith. They are often counted among the Kurds. Sometimes they are also perceived as a separate ethno-religious group. Nowadays, none of these two groups would consider themselves as Assyrians. Both the Chaldeans and the Assyrians belong to the group of Syriac-speaking Christians and have a common origin in ecclesiastical history. However, the mutual relationship remains problematic, and it is often characterized by demarcation tendencies. This is also reflected in the following statements. The former Chaldean patriarch Raphael I David from 1922 to 2003 is reported to have said, "Before I became a priest, I was an Assyrian. Before I became a bishop, I was an Assyrian. I am an Assyrian today and will remain an Assyrian tomorrow and for all times, and I'm proud of it." Before his death in 2003, he is reported to have pointed out that the term Chaldeans is just a name for the Catholics that belong to the churches of the East and has not any ethnical significance. His successor, Emmanuel III Daly, who lived until 2014, however, is reported to have stated in an interview in the year 2006 that every Chaldean who refers to himself as an Assyrian is a traitor, and that every Assyrian who refers to him as a Chaldean is also a traitor. And this difference in views, it becomes apparent that the use of the terms Chaldeans and Assyrians that are alternatively used to refer to either the ethnical or the ecclesiastical identity of a person is problematic. Also, the idea that each Assyrians as well as the Chaldeans form their own separate ethnical churches rather adds to the vagueness of the term. And it is especially this vagueness that opens the door to political instrumentalization. The end of the Ottoman Empire and the expulsion of the Assyrians. I will only introduce shortly to the events that led to the flat expulsions and migrations of the Assyrians and Chaldeans in the Iraq area. It is known that the persecution and expulsion of the Assyrians began in 1915 and 1918, between 1915 and 1918, during the World War I. After the World War ended, the British had, or during the time, the British had enticed the Assyrians to take their side in the war with the promise to grant them the full reign of a territory of their own. In this context, the term Assyrians mainly refers to a group of Christians for whom the Patriarch of the Apostolic Church of the East assumes a leading role on the ecclesiastical as well as political level. At the beginning, the promise of the concession of a territory of their own remained valid through the intervention of the League of the Nations or the Permanent Mandates Commission, even at that time when there were no longer any prospects of success for the Assyrians to get their own territory. The vague position of the Mandates Commissions has certainly contributed to the fact that the Assyrians still cherished their illusion for a long time. When all hope was lost for the Assyrians to get their own territory, or to gain autonomy one day, the British and the League of Nations requested the Assyrians to become Iraqi citizens. At the same time, however, the British Mandate powers built levies, troops from Assyrians in order to secure the position of power in Iraq. When the British Mandate in Iraq slowly approached its end, this marked the beginning of difficult times for the Assyrians who lived in this region. After the hope for a territory of their own became futile, Mar Eshai Shimon XXIII, the Catholicos Patriarch of the Apostolic Church of the East, called for a greater autonomy of the Assyrians on Iraq territory and asked the United Kingdom and the League of Nations for their support in this matter. His followers, who made up the group of British levies, were all concentrated in the north of the country. Thus, de facto, there would have been the possibility for them to form an Assyrian enclave. However, the Assyrians learned that they were unwelcomed in this region. For this reason, several tribal people had tried to return to their home region of Hakkari between 1925 and 32. However, the Turkish state prevented those attempts. In October 1931, the Assyrians had presented a petition to the League of the Nations in which they proposed the mass migration to Syria and several European countries. The intention was to draw the attention of the League of Nations to the unsolved problem once again. The League of Nations considered this petition in the autumn of the following year. However, An Assyrian levies officer submitted a manifesto to the British commander of the Assyrian levies on June 1st, 32, according to which all Assyrians wanted to leave the levies on July 1st in order to gather with all Assyrians in the region of Dohuk Ahmadiyya, north of Iraq, at the behest of Ma'asha Shimun. To aim was likely to gain autonomy to a coup de main. When Iraq became independent in October 32, a new plan for the settlement of the Assyrians was in place. After the League of Nations had considered the different aspects brought forward by the independent Iraqi government, it adopted a resolution. This resolution envisaged, to the extent of possibility, homogeneous units for the settlement of the Assyrians instead of following the Mandates Commission's recommendation to have a single coherent settlement area. The Patriarch, who requested a coherent settlement area and full autonomy, protested in vain against the establishment of several homogeneous settlement units. Some Assyrian leaders still believed or hoped that the League of Nations would offer them an enclosed settlement area. The fear of the Assyrians was significantly increased by acts of violence committed by Iraqis against the Assyrians in places such as Mosul, where the two ethnic groups lived together. The majority society in Iraq perceived the non-Arab Assyrian Christians as nothing more than British protégés and henchmen. From the Iraqi nationalists' perspective, the Assyrians were refugees from Turkey who should show more gratitude to Iraq and were not entitled to claim any special rights for themselves. At that time, the Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Said warned the Assyrians against any action that might embarrass the Iraqi government or that might provoke feelings of envy in other elements of the Iraqi nation. In the Arabic political circles, the opinion arose that the British government wanted to incite the minorities to revolt in order to destabilize the state and in order to prevent the Iraq to join the League of Nations. After the country had gained independence in October 32, the government asked the Patriarch of the Apostolic Church of the East to refrain from getting involved in the politics of his people in the future. However, the Patriarch held the opinion that his position bestowed him with religious and worldly power. In order to weaken the political power of the Patriarch, the government had incited his opponents to a rebellion against him behind his back and had appointed an arch-enemy of the Patriarch as president of the Committee of the Assyrian Settlement. The conflicts within the Assyrian population increased. One group wanted to embrace their life in Iraq. Another group, however, was adamant that the Assyrian community should be accorded special rights, and this group claimed the recognition as millet and not as a religious minority. The Patriarch blatantly ignored the group that wanted to integrate. He spoke of a violent submission that disregarded the minority rights that the League of Nations had promised to the Assyrians. He utterly refused any cooperation with the government, which hampered the successful implementation of a human settlement scheme that the Council of the League of Nations had recommended. On the strength of this, the government summoned the Patriarch to Baghdad for consultations. They informed him that while they recognized his spiritual authority over the Assyrians, they refused to grant the Patriarch, as well as any other spiritual leaders of any ethnic group in the Iraq, any temporal power. They wanted to the Patriarch to sign a written obligation to hamper the settlement scheme of the government in any way and to be loyal subjects of the kings at all times. The Patriarch answered he readily agreed with the settlement of the Assyrians as loyal Iraqi. However, he refused to sign the agreement, a guarantee that, in his opinion, would have been tantamount to abandoning his people. According to him, his temporal power as a patriarch was inextricably linked with the historical tradition of his country. The ensuing arrest of the patriarch in Baghdad further incited the defiance towards the government among the adherents in the north. The situation was further exacerbated when the Iraqi parliament and the press poisoned the atmosphere by voicing hostile remarks on the Patriarch and his people. In 1933, Malik Yaqub, a former official of the Alevis, took a stand against assuming the Iraqi nationality and against the settlement as offered by the central government on behalf of the Assyrian Patriarch Ma'asha-Shimu. 200 armed men accompanied him on a propaganda trip. The Iraqi government sent his army to the region of Tobruk in order to intimidate Yaqub and to prevent the Assyrians from joining him. Now I will pass over the Assyrian similar massacre, which I suppose you know, until the conflicts in this time where they were promised or they tried to go to Syria and cross the border and came back, and there was a big massacre in Simele and so on. After the massacre, people welcomed the Iraqi troops as heroes in Baghdad because they were said to have defended their home country. Bakr Siddiqui received the welcome of a hero in Baghdad. He had achieved to defeat the undefeatable Assyrians. So he was responsible for the massacre of hundreds of Assyrians. In mid-August 1933, the Patriarch was exiled to Cyprus and his Iraqi citizenship was withdrawn. From Cyprus, the Patriarch flew to the US in 1940, where he stayed until 2015. The new Patriarch came back to Iraq and he installed himself in Erbil, or near Erbil. When a meeting between the Patriarch Ma'asha-Shimun and the representatives of Iraq, Syria and Iraq took place in Washington in 1948, the Patriarch relinquished all claims regarding his temporal power and advised his adherents to live as loyal citizens in all the countries belonging to the Middle East. In 1968, the Assyrian Universal Alliance filled the political power vacuum that thus was created. The Chaldean Patriarch Joseph Emmanuel II Thoma pursued different goals for the Chaldean Church than the Patriarch of the Apostolic Church of the East. His policy was based on the following three principles. First, acceptance of the ruling government as long as there was no interference in the religious concerns of the Chaldeans. Second, separation between the church and the state. Third, commitment to the Arab national identity. With this basic attitude, he accepted the political circumstances and did not adopt a hostile stance vis-à-vis the young Iraqi state. His successor also adopted this political approach. His membership in the Iraqi Senate and his personal relationship with the King Faisal I had a beneficial effect on this relationship with the Iraqi state. Both these facts facilitated the integration in new social realities. On August 20, 1933, after the massacre and perhaps under the pressure of the Iraqi government, the Chaldean Patriarch Joseph Emmanuel II Thomas, the Chaldean priest Vadishu of Alkosh, as well as Athanasius Thomas Kassir, the Syrian Orthodox Bishop of Mosul, sent letters to the government in which they expressed their support for the Iraqi regime. The Assyrians were now increasingly identified with the followers of the Apostolic Church of the East, which was also due to the political interference of Shimon. The Chaldean population rapidly grew in the important cities of Baghdad, Basra, and Kirkuk. These cities also new churches were built. The focus of the Chaldean church moved from Mosul to Baghdad. This also changed the Chaldean society that developed from an agrarian community to an urban community. However, notwithstanding the high level of integration, many Chaldeans immigrated to so-called Christian countries that offered even greater freedom in religious matters. I will not speak now on the immigration of Assyrians to different countries, especially to Syria and Persia, but to continue with the differentiation from other Assyrian groups. The former Syrian Orthodox metropolitan Ephraim Bar Sauma had been part of the Assyrian delegation that had been sent to the peace conference in Paris 1919. He considered himself as an Assyrian, and also the others regarded him as an Assyrian. In 1932, he became Patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church, and he moved the residents from their Safaram to Mardin, in Mardin to Turkey to Homs in Syria. After the similar massacre in 1933, the new Patriarch adopted a strong anti-Assyrian attitude that had an influence on the whole community. The name component Assyrian that had been widely used until then was replaced by the term Syrian. Until the end, there were Syrian Orthodox communities, particularly in the United States of America, that referred to themselves as Assyrian Apostolic Churches. In 1952, the Patriarch published a brochure that was entitled The Syrian Church of Antioch, Its Name and History. In this brochure, he strictly rejected the use of the term Assyrians in the context of the Syrian Orthodox Church and its members. The reason for this change of name was that armed Assyrians, more precisely adherents of the Apostolic Church of the East, came to Syria and settled in the same region as the Syrian Orthodox population. In order to avoid a possible confrontation with the Syrian authorities, the state authorities, that was still under French mandate, the differentiation had to be visible also in the diocese and the choice of the name. Some analysis. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire that had been multi-ethnic state, nation states were established. The multi-ethnic state had hardly faced problems to unite different ethnic groups in one state. A peaceful coexistence of the different groups in a central state was more or less successful. However, already to the end of the 19th century, nationalistic tendency arose in the Ottoman Empire that had led to the persecution and suppression of minorities. The term nation was also coined by the political entity of the millet. The membership in a millet depended on the respective religious or confessional affiliation of a person. The spiritual leader of a millet possessed temporal as well as spiritual power. The newly founded national states perceived themselves as states of a dominant ethnic group that became a nation and to which all other ethnic groups had to adjust themselves. Among others, the Iraqi became Arabic, the Turkey became Turkish. The dominant ethnic groups, ethnos, became constitutive people of or nation, demos. In Turkey, there was a violent displacement of minorities. Okay. Violent displacement of minorities. In Iraq, they had the problems with the Assyrians. One of the mechanisms which helped or which enforced the enmity between the different groups, and especially against the Assyrians, was that they were characterized as others. The otherization, that means that they were always kept as other people, as coming from Turkey, as people who were like beasts and things like this. You find it in journals of this time from the Iraqi time. The question for both communities was assimilation and enculturation. Could it be or could it not be? Assimilation to the Iraqi state, or enculturation, what we do use today, that means to enter in the culture of the new state. The Assyrians were more interested in keeping the culture and the autonomy, while the Chaldeans had, call it assimilation or call it enculturation, opted for the integration in the Arabic state, and they called themselves Arab Christians and Iraqi Christians, and no more Syriac, Assyrian Christians. The policy is going on until today, and if you look at the policy of the Assyrian church in Iraq, or if you look to the policy of Zako, the Chaldean patriarch, you find still the difference. Zako is not speaking on the autonomy in the Nineveh plain, but for the integration on the Iraqi state. And he is also against Christian armed forces, while they are existing more in the Assyrian, but also in some other churches. So, thank you for your attention.